The silence was the first scream. One moment, the rhythmic drone of the emergency broadcast siren was a steel blanket over the town, oppressive but familiar. The next, it coughed, sputtered, and died, leaving behind a vacuum so profound it sucked the air from Lena's lungs. Her hand, chalk-dusted, froze mid-sentence on the blackboard. Newton's third law. She'd been explaining, but the only law that mattered now was the one of survival, etched into humanity's oldest instincts. 27th graders stared at her, their adolescent bravado instantly perforated by a fear that was ancient and raw. Outside the classroom window, beyond the neatly trimmed school lawn, the world had begun to unravel. Muffled shouts, the shriek of tires, then a sound like a wet sack of bricks dropped from a great height, followed by a chorus of guttural, inhuman roars. "Stay down," Lena barked, her voice tighter than she intended. "Away from the windows." Her thoughts were a frantic, clawing storm, but one image broke through with painful clarity. Sam. Her little brother, Sam, with his 2 big glasses and his asthma, trapped in Mrs. Gable's 4th grade class on the ground floor, East Wing. The East Wing faced the main road. A wave of nausea hit her. She had to get to him. This wasn't a drill. The drills had always been orderly, punctuated by the reassuring cadence of official instructions. This was something else. Something the Sirens had tried, and failed, to warn them about. The school's PA system crackled, a distorted blast of static, then Principal Thorne's voice, strained but severe. "Lockdown procedure is now in effect. All students and staff, secure your classrooms. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Secure your classrooms. Wait for further instructions." Secure the classroom, protocol. But Sam. Lena slammed the heavy classroom door, the old wood groaning, and fumbled with the lock. It clicked shut. She dragged a tall metal filing cabinet in front of it, her muscles screaming in protest. The children were huddled under desks, some crying softly, others frozen in wide-eyed terror. "It's okay," she lied, her heart hammering against her ribs. "We're safe in here. Mr. Thorne knows what to do. Did he? Did anyone?" The sounds from outside intensified, shattering glass, more of those hideous, tearing roars, and then, unmistakably, screams. Human screams, laced with an agony that chilled Lena to the bone. She had to move. She looked at her students, small faces pale in the dimming afternoon light filtering through the high windows. "Listen to me," she said, crouching down, trying to project a calm she didn't feel. "Stay under your desks. Do not open this door for anyone but me or Mr. Thorne. Understood?" They nodded, a sea of terrified eyes. She gave the biggest boy, a sturdy farm kid named Jake, a heavy textbook. "If anyone tries to get in and it's not me, you use this. Aim for the head." His eyes widened, but he clutched the book. Then, she was at the classroom's emergency exit, a reinforced door leading to an internal corridor. It was against every rule, but the rules had clearly checked out. Her mind raced. The East Wing. She could take the service stairs, avoid the main hallways. Every creak of the old building, every distant shout, amplified her fear. The air in the corridor was cold, tinged with a new, coppery scent she couldn't place. Blood? She found Sam's classroom in disarray. The door was ajar, splintered near the handle. Mrs. Gable, a kind woman with a fondness for lavender cardigans, lay just inside, her eyes wide and unseeing, a dark, terrible stain blooming across her chest. Lena choked back a sob, forcing herself to look away, to scan the room. Empty, overturned desks, scattered crayons. And Sam's inhaler, lying near the window, which was shattered, jagged teeth of glass pointing inwards. A small, muddy shoe print was visible on the sill. He'd gone out. Out there. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through her. "Sam," she whispered, then louder. "Sam." Only the whistling wind through the broken window answered. She scrambled to the opening, ignoring the glass scratching her hands. The playground outside was a scene of carnage. Figures, hunched and moving with a jerky, unnatural speed, were swarming the open space. They weren't people. Not anymore. Their limbs were too long, their movements too fast, their skin, wrong, twisted. One of them was tearing at something on the ground. Lena felt bile rise in her throat. A small movement near the equipment shed caught her eye. A flash of blue, Sam's favorite jacket. He was huddled behind a rusted slide, small and terribly alone. One of the twisted, its head lolling at an impossible angle, was sniffing the air, slowly turning in his direction. There was no time. Lena vaulted through the window, landing awkwardly on the damp grass, pain shooting up her ankle. She didn't care. "Sam," she screamed, running, her ankle protesting with every step. He looked up, his face a mask of pure terror. The twisted creature shrieked, a sound like nails on a chalkboard, and lunged. Lena pushed herself harder, a desperate primal cry tearing from her own throat. The world narrowed to that horrifying figure and her brother's small, vulnerable form. Just as she reached him, shoving him behind her, the creature was upon them, its fetid breath washing over her, its clawed hand reaching. Then, a deafening clang. The creature staggered back, a dark dent in its malformed skull. From the shadows of the main building's loading dock, a figure emerged, wielding a crowbar. Principal Thorne. His face was a grim, unreadable mask. "School is now a fortress," he announced, his voice devoid of emotion, echoing in the sudden, terrifying silence. Class dismissed, but the lesson, Lena knew, was only just beginning. The main gates, she saw with dawning horror, were buckling inwards. The silence that followed Principal Thorne's pronouncement was heavier than the earlier chaos, thick with unspoken dread and the metallic tang of blood that now seemed to coat the air. Thorne, his usually immaculate suit stained with something dark and viscous, gestured sharply with the crowbar, not towards safety, but towards the main building. "Inside. All of you who can still walk. Now." His voice, normally reserved for stern assemblies or disappointing faculty meetings, had acquired a serrated edge, a commander's bark that allowed no argument. Lena, still shielding a trembling Sam, felt a tremor of a different kind of fear, the fear of absolute, unquestioned authority born from crisis. They were herded, a ragged collection of shell-shocked staff and a few older students who'd been caught outside their classrooms, into the school gymnasium. The vast space, usually echoing with the squeak of sneakers and youthful exuberance, felt like a tomb. The heavy double doors were barricaded with upturned bleachers and weightlifting equipment dragged from the adjacent fitness room. Thorne stood on the small, rickety stage normally used for award ceremonies, the crowbar still in his grip, no longer a tool of maintenance but an emblem of his new, brutal power. His son, Eris Thorne, a young biology teacher with a gentler disposition, stood beside him, looking pale and overwhelmed, his hands stained with what Lena recognized as medical antiseptic. "Listen to me, and listen well," Thorne began, his voice amplified unnaturally in the strained quiet. "What's happening out there? We don't have all the answers. But we know this. It's fast, it's violent, and it changes people. We will refer to them as the Twisted. And they are no longer the people you knew." A murmur rippled through the small crowd. Mrs. Henderson, the librarian, a woman whose loudest utterance was usually a shh, started to weep openly. "Silence." Thorne's command cracked like a whip. "Your grief is a luxury we cannot afford. Your panic is a contagion we will not tolerate." He paced the small stage, his shadow looming large on the wall behind him. "This school, Blackwood High, is now our sanctuary, our fortress. The perimeter is compromised, but the main building is defensible, for now. From this moment, my word is law. There will be no debate, no dissent. Disobedience will be met with immediate and severe consequences. Our survival depends on order, on discipline, on absolute adherence to the new rules." A hand went up, tentative and shaky. It was Mr. Davies, the history teacher, a man known for his Socratic method and his belief in democratic process. "Marcus, with all due respect, who decided these rules? Shouldn't we have a consensus? We need to contact the authorities, the National Guard." Thorne's head snapped towards him. His eyes, usually a cool, assessing gray, were now flinty, dangerous. "The authorities, Mr. Davies?" He scoffed, a bitter, humorless sound. "The Sirens failed. The authorities are likely dead or worse. They're part of the horde clawing at our doors. Consensus?" He laughed, a harsh bark. "Consensus is what gets you eaten. I am in charge because someone must be, because I am willing to make the decisions that will keep as many of us alive as possible. And the first rule is, my decisions are final." He stepped closer to the edge of the stage, leaning forward, his gaze sweeping over them. "The second rule, All resources are now communal, controlled by me. Food, water, medical supplies. They will be rationed. Waste will be punished. Eris shifted uncomfortably beside his father, opening his mouth as if to speak, then closing it again, a flicker of something, doubt, fear, in his eyes. Lena clutched Sam tighter. The boy was shivering, his breath shallow and wheezing. He needed his inhaler, the one she'd seen lying abandoned in his classroom. Third rule, Thorne continued, his voice dropping to a more conspiratorial, yet no less menacing tone. Vigilance. Every one of you is a sentinel. Report any unusual behavior, any sign of change in anyone. Hesitation could doom us all. The twisted were our friends, our neighbors, perhaps even our family. That emotional attachment is a weakness we must discard. If someone is bitten, scratched, shows symptoms, they are a threat. They will be isolated. Immediately. He paused, letting the chilling implication hang in the air. There will be no room for sentimentality, only survival. He then outlined the immediate tasks, barricading all ground floor windows and secondary entrances, scouting parties to assess internal threats and secure supplies from other parts of the school, a designated infirmary to be run by Eris and any others with medical knowledge, and a strict curfew. He pointed at a group of older, stronger-looking male teachers and senior students. You four with me. We secure the cafeteria. It's our best chance for initial supplies. The rest of you, under Mr. Eris Thorne's direction, will begin fortifying this gymnasium. Use whatever you can find. Make it impenetrable. As Thorne prepared to leave, a young girl, no older than 10, sobbed loudly. I want my mommy. Thorne didn't even glance her way. It was Eris who knelt, his voice soft. We'll do our best to keep you safe, little one. But his father's shadow fell over them both. Eris, sentiment is a vulnerability. Remember that. Thorne's gaze was cold, a warning. He then turned back to the assembled, frightened faces. The old world is gone. Its rules are meaningless. Here, in these walls, we will forge a new order, or we will perish. There is no third option. Understand this, Blackwood High is no longer a place of learning. It is a crucible. And you will all be tested. He turned and strode towards the gym doors, his makeshift honor guard scrambling to follow, the crowbar, a grim scepter leading the way into their uncertain, brutal new reality. The heavy doors boomed shut behind them, sealing them in with their fear and their new, unyielding warden. Cale was already moving before Thorne finished his pronouncements. Rules were for people who waited to be told what to do. He'd always preferred figuring things out himself, usually how to get around rules, not follow them. The air in the gym felt thick, choking, heavy with the scent of fear and unwashed bodies. He needed space, information. The breach Thorne had mentioned, the one that let the twisted onto the grounds. Cale had a sickening hunch it wasn't just the main gates. The school was a labyrinth of old tunnels, forgotten storage rooms, and service corridors shown on no official map. He'd explored most of them over the years, more interested in their secrets than in calculus. He slipped away from the group being organized by Eris Thorne, melting into the shadows near the piled-up wrestling mats. Maya, one of the quieter senior girls, a brainiac who usually had her nose in a book, watched him with an unreadable expression. He ignored her. He wasn't looking for company. He needed to know what they were really up against, inside these walls. The initial screams from the East Wing, where the younger kids were, had been bad. But the silence that followed was worse. The service door at the back of the gym, leading to the boiler room, was his target. It was supposed to be locked, but Cale knew its latch was rusted, easily jiggled open with a bit of pressure and the right angle. He worked it silently, years of practice and minor acts of rebellion now proving unexpectedly useful. The metal groaned softly, then clicked. He slipped through, the oppressive atmosphere of the gym replaced by the cool, damp air of the school's underbelly. The rhythmic hum of the main generator, still miraculously running, was a faint comfort. He moved with a predator's stealth, senses heightened. The corridors here were narrow, pipes snaking along the low ceilings like metallic entrails. Dust motes danced in the occasional beam of light from a grime-covered utility window. He heard it before he saw it, a skittering sound, like nails on concrete, accompanied by a wet, guttural breathing. His heart hammered. He flattened himself against a cold brick wall, peering around the corner. It was one of them, a twisted. It had once been Mr. Henderson, the mild-mannered janitor who always had a piece of candy for the kids. Now, it was a grotesque parody. Its body was contorted, spine arched unnaturally, limbs elongated and ending in ragged, claw-like hands. Its clothes were torn, revealing grayish, mottled skin. Its head twitched, jaw slack, saliva drooling in viscous strings. It was sniffing at a locker, its movements jerky and unpredictable. Cale held his breath. The thing seemed to be tracking by scent, or sound. Suddenly, a muffled sob echoed from further down the corridor. A small supply closet, its door slightly ajar. Cale's blood ran cold. Someone was trapped. The Twisted's head snapped up, its lolling eyes, milky and vacant, focusing on the direction of the sound. It let out a low, gurgling hiss and began to shamble surprisingly fast towards the closet. Damn it, Cale wasn't a hero, he was a survivor. But the thought of leaving someone, probably a kid, to that thing, he scanned his surroundings. A discarded length of metal pipe, part of some old plumbing repair, lay nearby, heavy but manageable. He grabbed it, the cold steel a shock to his hands. There was no time for a plan. He burst from his hiding place, shouting, "Hey, ugly!" The Twisted whirled, its distorted face a mask of mindless rage. It shrieked, a sound that scraped Cale's nerves raw, and charged. It was faster than he'd anticipated, closing the distance in a horrifying blur of flailing limbs. Cale swung the pipe, a desperate, arcing blow. It connected with the creature's shoulder with a sickening wet thud. The Twisted stumbled, but didn't go down. It snarled, a fleck of dark spittle landing on Cale's cheek, burning like acid. He recoiled, gagging, and swung again, this time aiming for its head. The pipe glanced off its skull with a dull crack. The creature barely flinched. These things were tough, horrifyingly tough. It lunged, claws extended. Kyle sidestepped, the claws tearing through the fabric of his sleeve, missing his flesh by a hair's breadth. He was operating on pure adrenaline now, the pipe a clumsy extension of his will. He jabbed, shoved, swung, trying to keep the monster at bay. It was relentless, driven by a singular, horrifying purpose. He needed an advantage, an opening. The supply closet door creaked open further. A small, terrified face peeked out, a little girl, maybe 6 or 7, clutching a tattered teddy bear. Her eyes were enormous, fixed on the monstrous struggle before her. "Run," Cale yelled, parrying another swipe. "Get out of here, go back to the gym." The girl seemed frozen. The Twisted, distracted by his shout, turned its head slightly towards her. Cale saw his chance. He dropped low, swinging the pipe like a scythe at the creature's legs. It connected with a sickening crunch. One of its knees buckled at an unnatural angle. The Twisted shrieked in what might have been pain, or just fury, and toppled sideways, crashing into a stack of old paint cans. Cale didn't wait. He grabbed the little girl's arm. "Come on." He pulled her, half dragging her, back the way he'd come. She was crying, stumbling, but fear lent her speed. Behind them, the downed Twisted was already trying to pull itself up, its broken leg dragging uselessly, its horrible gurgling cries echoing in the narrow corridor. They reached the service door to the gym just as it was thrashing its way to its feet again, its unbroken leg propelling it forward with renewed, terrifying speed. Cale shoved the girl through the opening. "Barricade it," he yelled to the startled faces inside, then slammed the door shut, fumbling for the rusted latch. He could hear it snarling and scratching on the other side. He leaned against the door, chest heaving, the pipe clattering from his numb fingers. Maya was there, her eyes wide. "What was that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Cale looked at his torn sleeve, at the small, terrified girl now being comforted by a teacher. "That," he said, his own voice raspy, "was Mr. Henderson. And I think there are a lot more of them in here than Thorne realizes." The scratching on the door intensified, punctuated by a heavy thud. The old latch wouldn't hold for long. This fortress had too many broken gates. Lena's ankle throbbed with a dull, insistent pain, a counterpoint to the frantic rhythm of her heart. Sam was a dead weight against her, his small body racked with silent, shuddering sobs. Thorne's pronouncements in the gym had faded into a background hum of dread. Her world had narrowed to the immediate, desperate need to get Sam away from the main group, to find a quieter, safer space where he could breathe. The air in the gymnasium, thick with the scent of fear and unwashed bodies, was already making his wheezing worse. and she needed to find his inhaler. "Eris," she said, spotting Thorne's son directing a group of students trying to reinforce a set of fire doors with broken cafeteria tables. He looked up, his expression weary but compassionate, a stark contrast to his father's granite severity. "Sam, he needs his inhaler. It's in his classroom, East Wing." Eris's brow furrowed. "The East Wing is unsecure, Lena. My father gave strict orders." "I know," Lena interrupted, her voice tight with urgency. "But he can't. He won't last long without it. Especially not like this." She gestured to Sam, whose face was pale, lips tinged with blue. Eris hesitated, then nodded curtly. "I can't authorize you to go, but if you were to slip away, the infirmary is being set up in the old home economics room. It's relatively isolated. Room 112. Take him there first." His eyes conveyed a warning. "Be careful. We've already had encounters inside." Encounters, like Kale's, like her own brief, terrifying clash by the equipment shed. The Twisted weren't just outside, they were in the school. Lena's stomach twisted. "Thank you, Eris." She pulled Sam closer. "Come on, sweetheart. We need to move." Navigating the hallways was like tiptoeing through a nightmare. Every shadow seemed to writhe. Every distant creak sounded like an approaching horror. Thorne's edict about reporting anything suspicious echoed in her mind, but her focus was singular: Sam. She avoided the main corridors, sticking to the less-used locker bays and side passages, her knowledge of the school's layout a small advantage. The sounds were sporadic now: a distant crash, a muffled shout, then silence, broken only by Sam's labored breathing and the thud of her own aching footsteps. The East Wing felt different, colder. A tangible sense of violation hung in the air. Many classroom doors were ajar, some splintered. She found Sam's classroom, the scene of Mrs. Gable's tragic end. The image of the kind teacher, lifeless on the floor, flashed in Lena's mind, and she pushed it down, forcing herself to focus. Sam whimpered, burying his face in her side, refusing to look. "It's okay, Sammy, just a second." She scanned the chaotic room. There, by the shattered window, glinting faintly in the dim light, his blue inhaler. Relief, sharp and potent, washed over her. She snatched it up, her fingers trembling as she helped Sam take a deep puff. The tight rattling sound in his chest eased slightly. Not gone, but better. As she straightened, a flicker of movement in the corridor caught her eye. Not the jerky, unnatural gait of a Twisted, but something more, deliberate. A figure, silhouetted against the faint light from a distant window. It was too tall to be a student, too thin to be one of Thorne's enforcers. It hesitated, then retreated back around the corner. Unease prickled Lena's skin. They weren't alone. "We need to get to the infirmary," she whispered, pulling Sam along. Room 112. She remembered it, a large, airy room, slightly set back from the main thoroughfare of that corridor. They reached it without further incident, the door closed but unlocked. Inside, Eris was trying to organize a meager collection of first aid kits and scavenged linens. A couple of other teachers, their faces etched with strain, were tending to a student with a nasty gash on his arm. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and fear. "Lena, you made it." Eris's relief was palpable. He quickly examined Sam, his touch gentle. "He's stressed, exhausted. The inhaler will help. Let him rest here." He indicated a row of old cots that had been dragged in. "We don't have much, but it's quieter than the gym." As Sam finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, Lena felt a fraction of the tension leave her. She sank onto a stool, the adrenaline finally ebbing, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness. "What did you mean?" she asked Eris quietly, "about encounters inside?" Eris ran a hand through his already disheveled hair. "We found 2 more. Staff. One in the library, one in the West Wing stairwell. They weren't bitten. They just changed. It's not just a contagion spread by contact. It's something in the air, the water. We don't know." His voice was low, filled with a dreadful uncertainty. "My father, he wants to believe it's containable, that his rules can stop it. But this..." Suddenly, a crash from the corridor outside, followed by a guttural shriek, much closer this time. Eris tensed. Lena was on her feet, her heart leaping into her throat. She moved to the door, peering through the small, wire-reinforced window. A Twisted, formerly a dinner lady Lena vaguely recognized, was flailing wildly in the hallway, its movements spastic and violent. But it wasn't alone. Two figures, students by their build, armed with makeshift weapons, a baseball bat and a heavy fire extinguisher, were trying to fight it off. It was a desperate, clumsy battle. The Twisted was strong, unnervingly resilient. It lunged, and the student with the bat screamed as claws raked his arm. He stumbled back, dropping his weapon. The creature advanced on him, its broken-toothed maw snapping. Lena didn't think. She couldn't. The image of Sam, vulnerable on the cot, flashed in her mind. She yanked open the door. "Get back," she yelled. She had no weapon, nothing but her own fear, and a sudden, cold rage. She grabbed the nearest heavy object, a metal tray stand, and charged. She swung it with all her might, aiming for the creature's head. The stand connected with a sickening thwack, staggering the Twisted. It shrieked, a high-pitched sound of pure malice, and turned its attention to her. Its eyes, milky and unfocused, seemed to bore into her. This was it. This was the raw, brutal reality Thorne had spoken of. Survival. It lunged. Lena sidestepped, the tray stand awkward and heavy. She swung again, missing as it ducked with unnatural speed. Its claws tore at her sleeve, ripping fabric, stinging her skin. She could smell its fetid breath, a charnel house odor that made her gag. The injured student was scrambling away, the other, frozen in terror. It was just her and this thing. She knew, with a sickening certainty, that she couldn't win. Not like this. It was too strong, too fast. Desperate, she kicked out, connecting with its knee. It stumbled, giving her a precious second. She had to do something, anything. She saw the fire extinguisher, dropped by the terrified student. Heavy, pressurized, a weapon. With a surge of adrenaline, she lunged for it, scooping it up. The Twisted was back on its feet, snarling. She fumbled with the pin, her fingers clumsy with fear, then squeezed the handle. A huge cloud of white powder erupted, engulfing the creature. It shrieked, disoriented, clawing at its face. Lena didn't hesitate. She brought the heavy steel cylinder down hard on its head. Once, twice, a third time, the sound a sickening crunch. The creature spasmed and collapsed, twitching, then lay still. Silence descended, broken only by her ragged gasps and the whimpers of the injured student. Her arms ached, her whole body trembled. She had killed it. Or, it had been killed. She looked down at her hands, coated in the white powder, stained with something darker. The line between survival and brutality felt terrifyingly thin. Eris Thorne's infirmary, room 112, became a small, besieged island of relative calm in the sea of Blackwood High's escalating chaos. Days blurred into a grim routine of tending to the injured, mostly minor scrapes and sprains from barricade duty, but also the deeper psychological wounds of terror and loss, rationing dwindling medical supplies, and listening to the unsettling symphony of sounds from beyond their reinforced door, distant shouts, the occasional shriek of a Twisted, and the unnerving, rhythmic patrols of Principal Thorne's newly deputized student enforcers. Sam, though still anxious and prone to nightmares, was physically stable, his breathing eased by the recovered inhaler. Lena clung to that small victory, even as a larger, more insidious dread began to coil around her. Eris, despite his youth and the crushing weight of responsibility, proved to be a surprisingly steady presence. He worked tirelessly, his gentle demeanor a balm to the frightened and injured. He rarely spoke of his father, but Lena could see the strain in his eyes, the internal conflict that etched new lines around his mouth. They developed a quiet rapport, born of shared trauma and the unspoken understanding of their precarious situation. During one late-night vigil, while Sam slept fitfully on his cot, Eris finally voiced some of his unease. "My father, he believes absolute control is the only way," Eris said, his voice barely a whisper as he cleaned a cut on Lena's arm, a souvenir from her confrontation with the Twisted dinner lady. "He's always been decisive. After my mother died, when the early outbreaks started years ago, the ones the government managed to cover up, he became convinced that preparedness, unyielding strength, was the only answer." A flicker of pain crossed his face. "He sees compassion as a weakness we can't afford. But I look at these people, Lena." He gestured to the sleeping forms around them. "And I see that compassion, that humanity, is all we have left to hold on to. If we lose that, what are we surviving for? His words resonated with Lena. Thorne's iron rule had brought a semblance of order, yes, but at a cost. Fear was a constant companion, not just of the twisted, but of the principal's swift and harsh justice. Whispers circulated about students confined to isolation rooms for minor infractions, about dwindling food supplies being disproportionately allocated to Thorne's enforcers. The school, their supposed fortress, was beginning to feel more like a prison. One afternoon, a new kind of tension rippled through their sanctuary. Shouts from the main corridor, different from the usual panicked cries or twisted snarls. These were organized, authoritative. Eris and Lena exchanged worried glances. Moments later, the door to the infirmary burst open and two of Thorne's enforcers, older students puffed up with their new authority, stood framed in the doorway. Behind them, Lena could see figures she didn't recognize. Men in mismatched tactical gear, armed with actual firearms, not just makeshift weapons. "Principal Thorne requires your presence, Dr. Thorne. And yours, Miss Hayes," one of the student enforcers announced, his voice cracking slightly despite his attempt at a commanding tone. "There are visitors." Visitors. The word sent a chill down Lena's spine. In this new world, visitors were rarely a good thing. Eris looked equally apprehensive but nodded. "Stay with Sam," Lena whispered to Mrs. Peretti, a shaken but kind chemistry teacher who had been helping in the infirmary. They were escorted to the gymnasium, which had been transformed further. Barricades were more substantial, and an air of tense anticipation hung over the assembled staff and older students. Principal Thorne stood on the stage, not alone this time. Beside him stood a tall, imposing man in a stained military-style jacket, his face hard-bitten, a nasty scar tracing a path from his temple to his jaw. He carried a sleek, black assault rifle with casual menace. Two more armed men flanked him, their eyes cold and watchful, scanning the crowd. "People of Blackwood High," Thorne began, his voice carrying a new note, almost subservient. "We have made contact with an external authority. This is Officer Rigsby and his men. They represent a provisional government force, working to restore order and establish safe zones." A collective sigh of relief, a murmur of hope, swept through the gym. Lena felt a flicker of it herself, a desperate yearning for rescue, for a return to some semblance of normality. But as Rigsby stepped forward, a predatory stillness about him, her nascent hope withered. "Principal Thorne has ably maintained a degree of order here," Rigsby said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that brooked no argument. "Commendable, given the circumstances." He paced the stage slowly, his gaze sweeping over them, lingering on the younger faces, on the meager supplies stacked in a corner. "We are establishing a regional command post. Blackwood High, with its somewhat defensible structure and existing population, will serve as a collection point." Collection point? The term sounded ominous. "My men and I will augment your defenses, provide security, and begin organizing evacuations to more permanent, fortified settlements." Rigsby smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. It was the smile of a wolf assessing a flock of sheep. "Of course, this requires resources, fuel, food, medical supplies, and able-bodied personnel. We will be conducting a full inventory and a skills assessment." Thorne cleared his throat. "Officer Rigsby has assured me that cooperation will be mutually beneficial. They have access to communication lines, to resources we desperately need." "Indeed," Rigsby affirmed, "cooperation is key. We all want the same thing, survival. And to ensure that survival, certain contributions will be necessary. Your principal has already agreed to our terms." Lena's eyes darted to Thorne. He wouldn't meet her gaze, his expression unreadable, but she saw a muscle twitch in his jaw. What terms? What had he agreed to? Eris stepped forward, his voice respectful but firm. "Officer Rigsby, what kind of contributions are we talking about? Our supplies are already stretched thin, and many of our people are not combat ready." Rigsby's smile widened, showing a hint of teeth. "Ah, the doctor. Your father tells me you run the infirmary. Good. We'll need a list of your medical supplies. And a list of those fit for active duty. We're not just talking about fighting the twisted, son. We're talking about rebuilding. That requires labor, strong backs, willing hands." His eyes flicked towards a group of teenage boys, then towards some of the younger female teachers. A cold knot formed in Lena's stomach. And those who are unfit? Lena found herself asking, her voice small but clear in the sudden silence. The children? The sick? The elderly? Rigsby's gaze settled on her, cold and appraising. Resources are finite, miss. Hayes, is it? Difficult decisions must be made for the greater good. Those who can contribute will. Those who are a drain, well, not everyone can be saved. He shrugged, a casual, brutal dismissal. The new world requires pragmatism. Principal Thorne understands this. He has already provided us with an initial tribute of fuel from your school buses and a significant portion of your stored food. A gasp went through the crowd. Their carefully hoarded, life-sustaining supplies, given away. Thorne finally looked up, his face grim. It was a necessary concession to ensure their protection, their continued presence. Protection, Rigsby repeated, his voice silky. Exactly. And in return for our ongoing protection, and the promise of eventual evacuation for the useful elements of your community, we will require your full compliance. He gestured to his men. We will begin our assessment immediately. My men will be stationed throughout the school. Cooperate, and you might just see tomorrow. Hinder us. He let the threat hang, unspoken but terrifyingly clear. The hope that had flickered moments before was extinguished, replaced by a chilling certainty. They had traded one warden for another, and this new authority seemed far more dangerous, its intentions far more predatory. The fortress had just become a trap, and the price of rescue was beginning to look horrifyingly steep. Cale had watched the arrival of Rigsby's men from the ventilation shaft above the gymnasium, a vantage point he'd discovered offered excellent, if dusty, surveillance opportunities. He didn't like what he saw. These weren't saviors, they were vultures, their eyes gleaming with the same predatory light he'd seen in looters during the early days of the collapse, before the Twisted became the primary threat. Thorne, for all his iron-fisted rule, looked cowed, diminished, and Rigsby's talk of contributions and useful elements set every alarm bell ringing in Cale's head. He needed to know more. Thorne's office, Cale suspected, would be Rigsby's new command center. If there were plans, lists, anything that revealed their true intentions, it would be there. He waited until the gym began to empty, Rigsby's men starting to fan out, their boots heavy on the polished floor, their voices sharp and commanding. Then he slipped back into the labyrinthine ventilation system, moving with the silence and agility of a phantom. The vents were tight, dusty, and claustrophobic, but they offered a hidden network throughout the school. He found Maya near the barricaded library entrance, her face pale, her usual composure shaken. She was trying to discreetly observe Rigsby's men as they inventoried the books, presumably for fuel. "They're taking everything," she whispered to Cale as he materialized beside her, making her jump. "Even the textbooks. They said something about paper being good tinder." "They're not here to save us, Maya," Cale said grimly. "They're here to strip this place bare. And maybe us too." Maya's eyes, usually focused on the printed page, now held a new, hard light. "What are you thinking?" "Thorne's office. Rigsby will be there. I need to see what they're really planning." A spark of defiance lit her features. "I'm coming with you." Cale hesitated. This was dangerous, but Maya was smart, observant. And he had a feeling he might need a second pair of eyes, someone who could think under pressure. "Stay quiet. Do exactly as I say." They used a route Kyle knew well, one that involved climbing onto the roof of a single-story annex, then through a loose panel into an attic space that ran above the administrative wing. The late afternoon sun cast long, eerie shadows as they moved, the silence broken only by the distant, unsettling sounds of Rigsby's occupation. Thorne's office was on the ground floor, its windows now crudely boarded up from the inside by Rigsby's men. Cale found a small, grime-encrusted window in a rarely used storage closet adjacent to the office. It was high up, offering a limited view, but by standing on an overturned bucket, they could peer in. Rigsby was inside, seated behind Thorne's large mahogany desk as if he owned it. Thorne himself stood stiffly to one side, looking like a reluctant subordinate. Two of Rigsby's men were present. Spread across the desk were maps of the local area and what looked like school rosters. "The fuel from the buses is a good start, Thorne," Rigsby was saying, his voice carrying clearly through the thin wall. "But my convoy needs more to reach the rendezvous point. The generator here, how much diesel does it have?" "Enough for a few more weeks if rationed carefully," Thorne replied, his voice strained. It's essential for the lights, the infirmary. Rigsby waved a dismissive hand. We'll take what we need. Lights are a luxury. As for the infirmary, he leaned back, steepling his fingers. Your son, the doctor. He seems capable, and that other one, the teacher, Hayes, resourceful. They'll be useful at the processing center. Processing center. KL and Maya exchanged a horrified glance. And the children? Thorne asked, his voice barely audible. You said there would be a place for them. Rigsby chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. There's always a place for everyone, Thorne. Don't you worry your head about the details. Just ensure your people remain compliant. We need a smooth extraction of assets. He tapped a list on the desk. This roster, mark the ones suitable for labor. Ages 15 to 40, healthy. The younger ones, they require too many resources, liabilities. The casual cruelty of his words struck Cale like a physical blow. Liabilities. Sam, the little girl he'd saved from the twisted janitor, all the children. You can't, Thorne began, a flicker of his old authority returning. Rigsby slammed his hand on the desk. I can, and I will, Principal. You made a deal to save your own skin and what you perceived as your flock. Don't develop a conscience now. We have what we need here. My scout teams report minimal twisted activity in the immediate vicinity. Looks like your fortress did its job thinning them out for us. We load up the useful personnel and supplies, then we torch the rest. Standard scorched earth, no loose ends, no drain on resources further down the line. Torch the rest. Kyle felt sick. Maya's hand clamped onto his arm, her nails digging in. One of Rigsby's men spoke. Sir, patrol just reported some movement near the West Wing service tunnels. Could be rats, or could be some of these school kids getting curious. Rigsby's eyes narrowed. No curiosity, no heroes, double the patrols. Anyone found outside designated areas, especially near our vehicles or supply caches, shoot to wound. We need to make an example. We leave at dawn, day after tomorrow. Everything needs to be ready. Dawn, day after tomorrow. They had so little time. Cale knew they had to get out of there, warn the others. But as he shifted to pull Maya back from the window, his foot dislodged a loose piece of plaster from the aging wall. It clattered softly inside the storage closet. Instantly, Rigsby was alert. What was that? His men drew their weapons. Outside the office sounded like the storage closet. Cale's heart leaped into his throat. Trapped. Go, he hissed at Maya, shoving her towards the attic access panel they'd used to enter. Get to Lena, tell her everything, now. He could hear Rigsby shouting orders, the heavy thud of boots approaching the closet door from the office side. Maya scrambled up, disappearing into the darkness of the attic, just as Cale kicked the overturned bucket away from the window. He needed to create a diversion, buy her time. He braced himself, grabbing a rusty metal rod he'd spotted earlier. The closet door handle rattled. He had seconds. This was no longer about stealth. This was about survival, and giving Maya a chance to sound the alarm. The door burst inward. The air in the infirmary was thick with unspoken fear, a palpable entity that clung to Lena like a shroud. Sam slept, but his small face was tight with anxiety even in slumber. Eris moved among the few patients with a forced calm, but Lena saw the tremor in his hands as he changed a dressing, the way his eyes kept flicking towards the door, expecting the next intrusion, the next demand from Rigsby's men. Maya's breathless arrival, tumbling from a hidden ceiling panel Cale had shown her, coated in dust and terror, shattered their fragile illusion of sanctuary. They're planning to take the able-bodied, Maya gasped, her words tumbling out in a rush, the food, the fuel, and then they're going to burn the school. With everyone else still inside, Rigsby called them liabilities. The word hung in the air, ugly and cold. Cale, he sent me to warn you. They caught him. I heard shouting. Her voice broke, her composure finally crumbling. Lena felt a cold dread seep into her bones, colder than any fear the Twisted had inspired. This was calculated, human cruelty, a betrayal far more insidious. Thorne, he had condemned them. His necessary concession was a death sentence for the weakest. For her Sam, rage, hot and fierce, warred with a sickening despair. What could they do? Rigsby's men were armed, organized. They were trapped. Eris listened, his face growing paler with each word. The mention of his father's complicity, even if under duress, seemed to strike him deeply. "Burn it?" he whispered, aghast. My father, he couldn't agree to that, but the doubt was clear in his eyes. He knew his father's capacity for ruthless pragmatism. "We have until dawn, day after tomorrow," Maya said, her voice regaining some strength. "That's when they plan to leave. Kale bought me time. We have to use it." "Use it how?" Lena asked, her mind racing. "Fight? With what? Against men with assault rifles? Flee? Where?" The world outside was teeming with Twisted, and Rigsby's men would be watching every exit. She looked at Sam, his small, innocent face. She would not let him become a liability. "There are tunnels," Maya said, looking at Eris. "Kale showed me some of them. Old service routes, mostly collapsed, but he said one might lead out beyond the school grounds, near the old creek bed. It's risky, narrow, but it's a chance." Eris nodded slowly. "I know the ones he means. My grandfather, when he was principal here, used to talk about them. They were sealed off decades ago." If Kale thought one was viable, he looked around the infirmary, at the handful of injured, the terrified parents clinging to their children. "We can't save everyone by fighting. But maybe we can get some of the children out." A moral dilemma, stark and brutal, confronted Lena. Save Sam, and perhaps a few others, through a desperate, uncertain escape. Or stay, try to reason with Thorn, to resist Rigsby, and risk everyone? The memory of Rigsby's cold eyes, his casual dismissal of human life, answered her question. There would be no reasoning with him, and Thorn had already made his choice. "We have to try," Lena said, her voice firm. "Maya, can you find this tunnel entrance again? Eris, we need to gather the children, quietly, a few adults to help. We can't take many. It has to be tonight, under cover of darkness, before Rigsby tightens his grip further, before they realize Kale is truly missing and not just detained." The plan was desperate, fraught with peril. They would have to move like ghosts through a school patrolled by armed guards. The tunnel itself was an unknown. But the alternative, waiting for Rigsby's processing and the subsequent inferno, was unthinkable. As night fell, casting the school into an even deeper gloom, punctuated only by the harsh glare of Rigsby's portable floodlights in the main courtyard and the flickering emergency lights in some corridors, the tension in the infirmary became almost unbearable. Eris and Lena, with Maya's help, began to discreetly approach the parents of the youngest children, whispering their desperate plan. Some refused, too terrified to leave the relative, if false, security of the infirmary. Others, seeing the grim determination in Lena's eyes, the quiet despair in Eris's, agreed. Each hushed conversation was a gamble. They gathered a small group, 6 children, including Sam, and 3 other adults. Mrs. Peretti, the chemistry teacher, surprisingly resolute. Mr. Henderson, the elderly janitor Kale had wrongly presumed Twisted, who had actually been hiding and knew some of the school's older sections, and a quiet, strong father of 2 of the children. Suddenly, the infirmary door creaked open. Not Rigsby's men. It was Thorn. He looked haggard, his suit rumpled, his eyes haunted. He surveyed the scene, the huddled children, the grim-faced adults, and his expression hardened. "What is the meaning of this, Eris, Miss Hayes?" Eris stepped forward, placing himself between his father and the children. "We know, Father. We know about Rigsby's plan, to take what he wants and destroy the rest." Thorn's face contorted. It was the only way, to save some. He has the guns, the manpower. What would you have me do? Fight a losing battle and condemn everyone? "There are other ways," Lena said, her voice trembling but clear. "There is always another way than sacrificing the innocent." "Sacrifice?" Thorn scoffed, a bitter, broken sound. "This is survival. This is the world now. Idealism is a luxury that died with the Sirens. Then we choose to die with it, rather than live by your survival." Eris retorted, his voice ringing with a conviction Lena hadn't heard from him before. "We are taking the children. We're trying to get them out." Thorn stared at his son, a complex mix of anger, betrayal, and perhaps a flicker of something else. Shame? "You're fools. You'll lead them to their deaths. The tunnels are death traps. Rigsby's men are everywhere." "Maybe," Lena said, clutching Sam's hand tightly. "But it's a chance, and it's better than waiting for Rigsby's fire." A tense standoff ensued. Thorn looked from his son to the children, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Lena thought he might try to stop them, to raise the alarm. His internal struggle was palpable. Then, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the world, he stepped aside. "The main western patrol route is lightest between 2 and 3 a.m., he said gruffly, not looking at them. "Rigsby's men get complacent on the graveyard shift. If you're going, go then. And if you see Cale, tell him I—" He couldn't finish the sentence, turning abruptly and leaving, the door closing softly behind him. An ambiguous act that could be either reluctant aid or a final washing of his hands. The decision was still theirs, the risk entirely their own. The clock was ticking. The labyrinthine service tunnels beneath Blackwood High were a Dantean vision of choked darkness and decay. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth, rust, and something else, something faintly charnel that made Lena's stomach churn. Old Man Henderson, his face a pale beacon in the weak beam of Lena's dying flashlight, led the way, his movements surprisingly agile for his age. Behind Lena, Eris helped shepherd the small, terrified children, while Maya and Mrs. Peretti brought up the rear, their faces grim masks of determination. Sam clung to Lena's hand, his small whimpers muffled against her leg. Each drip of water, each scurrying rat, sent fresh waves of terror through their small, fugitive band. Thorne's information about the patrol routes had been accurate, or perhaps luck had been with them. They'd slipped out of the infirmary and into the bowels of the school without encountering Rigsby's men, moving like wraiths through the sleeping fortress. Now, the true test began. The tunnel Cale had believed viable was narrower than expected, forcing them to walk single file, sometimes crouching low to avoid sagging pipes and crumbling concrete. Progress was agonizingly slow. "Are we there yet?" one of the little girls whispered, her voice trembling. "Soon, Petal, soon," Eris murmured, his voice a strained attempt at reassurance. Old Man Henderson paused at a junction where the tunnel branched. One way was a dead end, choked with rubble. The other— "This should be it," he wheezed, shining his own flickering flashlight down the narrow passage. "Leads out towards the old creek bed, beyond the fence line." But Cale said it was tight. Might be partially collapsed further in. As they pressed on, the tunnel grew more constricted. The air became heavier, colder. Lena could feel the oppressive weight of the earth above them. Panic, cold and insidious, began to creep into her heart. What if Thorne was right? What if this was a death trap? She pushed the thought away, focusing on Sam's small hand in hers, the feel of his slight weight relying on her. Suddenly, a low growl echoed from the darkness ahead. Not a rat, something larger, guttural. Henderson froze. "Twisted," he breathed, his voice raspy with fear. "Thought these tunnels were clear." Before anyone could react, a figure lunged from the shadows, a twisted, its form emaciated and contorted, eyes glowing faintly in the reflected flashlight beams. It was trapped in the narrow passage with them, a cornered animal. It shrieked, a sound that reverberated off the tunnel walls and clawed its way towards Henderson. "Get back," Eris yelled, shoving Lena and the children behind him. He had armed himself with a heavy wrench from the infirmary's maintenance closet. He met the Twisted's charge, swinging the wrench in a desperate arc. It connected with the creature's shoulder, a sickening thud. The Twisted stumbled but recovered with horrifying speed, its claws raking Eris's arm. He cried out in pain but held his ground, a desperate shield between the monster and the vulnerable group. Lena watched in horror, frozen for a split second. Then, adrenaline surged. She couldn't let Eris fight alone. "Maya, the children," she yelled, pushing Sam towards Mrs. Peretti. She grabbed a short length of rusted pipe Henderson had been using as a walking stick and plunged into the fray. The tunnel was too narrow for effective maneuvering. It was a brutal, close-quarters struggle. Lena swung the pipe, connecting with the Twisted side. It snarled, turning its baleful attention to her. Its claws lashed out, tearing her sleeve, drawing blood. Pain, sharp and hot, shot up her arm. Behind them, Maya was trying to usher the terrified children further back down the tunnel, away from the fight. But there was nowhere to go. They were trapped between the Twisted and the unknown darkness behind them. Just as the Twisted lunged for Lena again, a new sound erupted from further down the tunnel, from the direction they were trying to flee, the unmistakable metallic clang of a firearm being cocked. Well, what have we here?" Rigsby's voice, cold and mocking, echoed through the narrow passage. Looks like the rats decided to leave the sinking ship. Floodlight beams pierced the darkness, blinding them. Rigsby stood at a bend in the tunnel, flanked by two of his heavily armed men. He had found them. Trapped, twisted in front, Rigsby behind. Despair, absolute and crushing, threatened to overwhelm Lena. But then, a different kind of chaos erupted. From a side passage Cale had mentioned as being collapsed but possibly passable for someone small, a figure burst out, yelling, covered in dust and fury. Cale. He was alive. He wielded a sharpened piece of rebar like a spear, and charged not at the twisted, but straight at Rigsby's men. "Leave them alone, you bastards." His sudden, unexpected attack threw Rigsby's men into momentary disarray. One of them fired his weapon, the sound deafening in the enclosed space, the bullet ricocheting wildly. Cale ducked, weaved, and slammed his rebar into the leg of the nearest soldier, who screamed and went down. The diversion was all Eris needed. With a desperate roar, he swung the wrench again, a crushing blow to the twisted's head. The creature shuddered, gurgled, and collapsed. Eris stumbled back, clutching his bleeding arm, but his eyes were blazing. "Now," Cale yelled, grappling with the second soldier. "Get the kids out. The exit is just past these pigs. I cleared it." Rigsby, enraged, raised his rifle, aiming at Cale. "You little—" Before he could fire, another figure emerged from the shadows behind Rigsby, Principal Thorn. He held the crowbar from the first day, his face a mask of grim resolve. He brought it down with savage force on Rigsby's gun arm. The rifle clattered to the ground. Rigsby howled in pain and fury. "My school, my students," Thorn roared, no longer the cowed subordinate, but a father defending his den. He engaged Rigsby in a desperate, brutal struggle, crowbar against Rigsby's sidearm. "Go, Lena, go," Eris urged, pushing her towards Cale, who had managed to incapacitate the second soldier. Lena didn't hesitate. She grabbed Sam, pulling him along as Cale cleared a path. Maya, Mrs. Peretti, and Henderson followed with the other children, scrambling past the fighting, towards the faint glimmer of hope Cale had indicated. The sounds of the struggle behind them, Thorn's bellows, Rigsby's curses, the grunts of pain, were a terrifying soundtrack to their escape. They burst out of the tunnel into the pre-dawn gloom, emerging into a tangle of overgrown bushes near the old creek bed, well beyond the school's perimeter fence. They were out. Gasping for breath, bleeding, terrified, but out. Cale, his face streaked with dirt and blood, pointed towards a dense patch of woods. "This way. We need to put distance between us and the school before Rigsby's other men realize what's happened." Lena looked back towards the school, a dark silhouette against the paling sky. Smoke was beginning to curl from one of the windows. Had Rigsby's men started the fires already? Or was it Thorn, creating a diversion, a final act of sacrifice? She would never know. Eris stood beside her, his gaze fixed on the rising smoke, his expression a mixture of grief and a terrible, nascent understanding. He had lost a father, but perhaps found himself. The climactic confrontation was over, but the battle for survival had just entered a new, uncertain chapter. The sun, when it finally crested the horizon, did little to warm the chill that had settled deep in Lena's bones. They huddled in the relative shelter of a dense thicket, miles from the smoldering ruin that had once been Blackwood High. The sounds of pursuit had faded, replaced by the uneasy quiet of the wilderness, a quiet punctuated by the distant, unsettling howls of unseen creatures, perhaps twisted, perhaps just the natural denizens of a world reclaimed. Sam, exhausted but miraculously unharmed, slept fitfully in her arms, his small face still smudged with dirt and fear. Cale, despite his own injuries, had scouted their immediate surroundings, his youthful recklessness now tempered by a grim pragmatism. He returned with a grim report. No sign of Rigsby's main force, but evidence of twisted activity was plentiful. The world outside the school's treacherous sanctuary was every bit as hostile as they had feared. Old Man Henderson, his energy spent, sat slumped against a tree, his breathing shallow. Mrs. Peretti was tending to Eris's arm, her chemistry knowledge proving surprisingly useful in improvising antiseptic from wild plants Cale had identified. Eris himself was quiet, withdrawn, the image of his father's desperate final stand, or perhaps his calculated sacrifice, replaying in his mind. Had Thorn survived? Had he intended to? The questions hung heavy, unanswerable. What do we do now? Maya voiced the question on everyone's mind, her gaze sweeping over their small, battered group. 6 children, wide-eyed and traumatized. 5 adults, injured, exhausted, and burdened with an almost impossible responsibility. They had escaped Rigsby's fiery betrayal, but to what? Lena looked at the faces around her, the fear, the exhaustion, but also a flicker of something else, something resilient. They had faced death, betrayal, and unimaginable horror, and they were still here. She thought of Thorn, his desperate gamble. Whether it was for redemption or a final, cynical act of control, he had bought them this chance. And Kyle, who had risked everything to warn them, to fight for them. Eris, who had stood against his own father to protect the innocent. We keep moving, Lena said, her voice raspy but firm. Kale, you said there were whispers among Rigsby's men about a larger settlement, west of here, near the coast. He was taking his assets there. If it exists, it might be safer than this. She gestured to the untamed woods around them. It was a slim hope, a dangerous journey, but it was better than surrendering to despair. It's a long shot, Lena, Kale cautioned. And Rigsby, if he's alive or his men, they'll be looking for us, or at least, for anyone who got away. We have to try, Eris said, his voice quiet but resolute, echoing Lena's sentiment. He looked at the children, a new sense of purpose hardening his gaze. We owe it to them, and to those who didn't make it out. The cost had been immense. Friends, colleagues, the illusion of safety, their innocence, all consumed by the inferno of the new world. Lena thought of Mrs. Gable, her kind smile silenced forever. Of the students she couldn't save from her classroom. The weight of it was a physical ache in her chest. But Sam was alive. These children were alive. That had to be enough, for now. They gathered their meager belongings, a few scavenged supplies, the clothes on their backs, the heavy burden of memory. Old Man Henderson, too weak to travel further, insisted on staying behind. I'll slow you down, he wheezed, pressing a worn compass into Kale's hand. Find a rise. Watch for smoke. Might lead you to others, or away from trouble. His eyes, though tired, held a spark of defiance. Don't let those bastards win. Leaving him was another painful sacrifice, another tear in the fabric of their dwindling humanity. But they had to, for the children. As they set off, a small, desperate caravan into the unknown, Lena walked beside Kale, Sam held tight against her. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with peril. The twisted were out there. Men like Rigsby were out there. Hunger, thirst, and exhaustion would be their constant companions. But as she looked at the small, determined group around her, a fragile seed of hope, buried deep beneath layers of grief and fear, began to stir. They were survivors. They had faced the failure of Sirens, the transformation of their sanctuary into a fortress, then a prison, then a pyre. They had witnessed the worst of humanity, and also, perhaps, glimpses of its best, in sacrifice, in courage, in the stubborn refusal to let the light of compassion be entirely extinguished. The school was gone, a monument to a fallen world. Class had been brutally dismissed, but the lesson, Lena realized with a grim certainty, was far from over. It was etched into every step they took into the wilderness, every breath they fought for. Survive, protect, endure. And perhaps if they were strong enough, if they were lucky enough, they might one day find a place where they could do more than just survive, a place where they could begin to rebuild, to live again. The silence ahead was no longer just an absence of sirens. It was a vast, untamed canvas upon which their future, however terrifying, however uncertain, would be written.